Hey there! This video is all about in-camera noise reduction in the Canon R5C. Some of you have asked me about the in-camera noise reduction, and personally, my curiosity was sparked after watching Gerald Undun's review on this camera, which I'll leave link down below. Awesome video. And in that video, he recommended applying a little bit of in-camera noise reduction to increase the dynamic range of the R5C. Of course, I'm thinking, yeah, let's increase the dynamic range of the R5C, and he had numbers to back that up. So what I want to do in this video is talk a little bit about noise reduction in general, show you how to use it in this camera, show you some tests that I did, and then some of my recommendations. But first of all, before we get into that, you are probably wondering if you should use in-camera noise reduction or not at all. Now, if you were going for the maximum image quality and the most control over your image, you're probably not using noise reduction whatsoever, and I'd probably recommend that you turn it off altogether. And you're probably also shooting in RAW. So to get the maximum control and image quality out of this camera, you probably want to shoot in RAW with noise reduction turned off. Now, for a lot of us out there who are doing online content creation like YouTube or maybe some quick turnover client work, you may not want to spend the time and energy tweaking that stuff in post. Now, there are great tools in DaVinci Resolve. There's an awesome noise reduction tool, and also there's a basic one in Final Cut Pro. It allows you some more control over the image afterwards. But if I can get it closer in camera, I'm a huge fan because I'm trying to turn over content pretty quickly. Now let's get into the different types of in-camera noise reduction that you can find in the R5C. And for this, I looked at the manual. That's right, I looked at the manual, page 131 of the manual. I'll leave that link down below. And there are a couple of different settings, and we'll go through them in the camera. As I said, I'll show you some images with this. And so you can turn it to auto on, which I usually don't recommend because I have no idea what that's doing. And there's two other ones. The first one is the spatial filter, and the settings are off and 1 to 12. It reduces the noise by applying a soft-like effect on the entire picture. When set to a value other than off, after images are not produced, but the whole image will have a softer look. So to me, this is kind of what I think of with noise reduction. It kind of smooths out the image, and that sort of reduces the noise, but it also reduces the the detail and the sharpness, so you don't get anything for free. The other one is frame correlation, and this one reduces the noise elements by comparing the current image to the previous one, and when set to a value other than off, the perceived resolution will not be affected, but an after image may appear for moving subjects. So this one was really interesting to me, and I wanted to look into both of these further. So the first thing I want to do here is jump into the camera and show you where to access this and how to do it. Now let's dive into the camera, and I can show you where to find all these settings in the menus. So we're going to press the menu button and go over to the second tab there, custom picture, and this is where you change your picture profile. And so generally I'm shooting in C-Log3, and that's why I recommend to get the most dynamic range and the highest quality image, always shoot in C-Log3. But if you click on this, you can change your settings from BT709YDR to all the other ones in there. But as I said, we're going to be using C-Log3. So what you can do here is if you hit Edit CP or Edit Custom Picture, it is by default protected, and that's to keep you from changing the default settings, but you can change them. So hit protect, change it to unprotect, and now we can go through and change any of these settings. There's so many settings in here, but we're going to be focusing on is noise reduction. Now what you can do is just change the settings in picture profile 2, or you can set up a custom one. And if you make any mistakes, all you have to do, or if you don't remember what you changed, you can always just reset it back to Canon Log 3. It'll put back the default settings, and you'll see it stays protected. So as I said, you can change in here, or you can set up a custom one. Let's set up a custom one. Let me show you how to do that. So we go back, and we're going to go to the selection here, and I'm going to choose C8, which is user 8. There's a whole bunch more. You can have a lot of different settings. So we'll go into user 8, and we're going to edit this and make this our own. And so to start this off, we want to start with the C-Log3 profile. So we're going to go to reset and change it to C-Log3. So what that does is it puts the base C-Log3 settings in our user 8 custom picture profile. And we're going to unprotect it so we can go in and edit it. And now what we're going to be messing around with today and playing with, and what this whole video is about, is noise reduction. So if we go into noise reduction, here are the settings that it comes by default for C-Log3. It comes default, automatic is turned on. So if you don't want automatic noise reduction, make sure you turn that to off, or if you want to do your own settings, this is where you do it, but this is how it comes out of the box. So we'll turn the automatic to off, and then the spatial filter you can change, as I mentioned before, from off 1 up to 12, and the frame correlation off 1 up to 3. So that's where you get all the settings in the camera, and now we can get into testing this. For all these tests, I shot them in 4K 422 10-bit XF ABC long op, because that's the one I use most of the time, and this is all shot in C-Log 3 as I mentioned. So in these shots here, I shot a test chart and I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't really see very much. So I'll show you the test chart and then I'll zoom in 600% so you can take a look. And when I'm going through these, make sure you look at the upper right part of the screen to look at the noise level, and also look at the sharpness that you can tell in the bottom left part of the screen. The noise was pretty subtle and I wasn't sure if it was going to come through on YouTube, so what I did is I wanted to push the camera a little bit harder, so I underexposed it by 2 stops and then adjusted the exposure in post to give it a little bit more noise. So take a look at these images. Now let's chat about some of the results. And what I noticed, there wasn't a ton of cleaning up from off to 2 to 4, but what I did notice was that from 4 to 6, I started losing some sharpness and some contrast and some of the detail. And so I personally probably wouldn't go past 4 for the spatial filter. But what I did notice was that it really did clean up the image from 8 to 10 to 12. And that's where I see a lot of noise reduction happening and a lot of reduction in noise, but it comes at a cost of losing detail and sharpness. Now let's get to talk about frame correlation. I did a few tests here, and so I was trying to understand this a little bit more, and I found an article on Canon's website, which I'll leave linked down below, that the frame correlation is always set to off by default across the Cinema EOS range, and one of the reasons we don't enable it is because of the potential variation in performance between different scenes. There may be some scenes where the frame correlation is working fairly heavily because it can pick up the noise between different frames, whereas in others it may not pick up the subtle noise as much. All right, so with this in mind, I did a few tests here and I want to show you, and I think what I've realized is that it's going to take a lot more testing to go through this, and it might vary a lot depending on that. Now for me personally, I shoot a lot outside and I shoot a lot in well-lit situations. I don't shoot a lot of stuff with high ISO and high noise. But let's go through and take a look at the tests. I did the same tests as I did before, from off and then going up from 1, 2 to 3. And again, I didn't see a huge difference here, so I did the same thing with the underexposure of 2 stops, raising the exposure in post with the same steps, so take a look. So what I noticed here is there wasn't a big difference with the 1 setting. I think the 2 looks pretty good. I think the 3 cleaned up quite a bit. So now I was curious about getting any artifacts or anything weird, because what it's doing is it's comparing every frame to the frame before it to eliminate the noise. And so what I did is I went out and shot near my house on a busy road. The cars are going between 55 and 60 miles an hour usually. And I wanted to see if I could see any artifacts here. So the first thing I did was I shot everything at 24 frames per second. This was a very well-lit situation and there wasn't much noise in the image, so maybe that's why I didn't pick up any artifacts or anything weird going on. So what I did was I shot the next sequence in 60 frames a second and slowed that down to 24. Well, both in the 24 frames per second and the 60 frames per second that was slowed down, I didn't notice any artifacting or anything weird going on, but this was a very well lit situation with a very minimal amount of noise because it was shot during the day and at base ISO. Now, of course, your mileage may vary depending on what you're shooting, if there's more noise in your images and those sorts of things. But for me personally, I am usually shooting outdoors, well lit at the base ISO of 800 in C-Log3 or in a well lit situation, and I don't really have a lot of noise. So the best thing you can do is try to eliminate the noise by just keeping your ISO low, and that'll be the best thing you can possibly do. So open up your lens if you're in low light and keep the ISO low. Remember, there is a second base ISO of 3200 on the R5C. Now, in terms of overall recommendations, I know that Gerald recommended having a spatial filter set to 4 and the frame correlation set to 2. And I think these are pretty good recommendations overall, because what I noticed is after 4, on the spatial filter, it was that it started to reduce the sharpness, and so I didn't want to do that. So I'd say 2 or 4 in there, and then for the frame correlation, I think you could go anywhere from 1 to 3. Now, of course, as I said, your mileage may vary, but I didn't see any issues at 3, and I noticed the image cleaned up quite a bit from 2 to 3. So I might want to leave it at 2, but experiment with 3. Again, these are just what I got in these tests here. If you've experimented with this and are using some in-camera noise reduction and you want to contribute to the conversation, please leave that down below in the comments. It'd be greatly appreciated. Otherwise, just want to show you what this camera is capable of. And again, if you're looking for maximum image quality, turn noise reduction off in the camera and even shoot in RAW, and then you can control the image even better in post. Hope you enjoyed this, and there's a bunch more cool videos on the channel already about the R5C. I'll leave those linked down below if you want to check that out. More great videos coming up, so make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.